The Plein Air Easton Podcast is brought to you by the Avalon Foundation, enriching the lives of those on the Eastern Shore of Maryland through the arts. Visit avalonfoundation.org for details on events, performances, and educational programming offered throughout the year. This episode is sponsored by Paint Out West, a virtual painting workshop conducted by Chris Kolupski. Paint along with Chris throughout October from the comfort of your own home. Visit chriskolupski.com to sign up. That's ChrisKolupski.com.
Apparently you sound awesome, Chris. We can only sound so good. We're never awesome. But
Hey, you want to know fabulous sound technicians why I sound so good on a windy cliff?
Tell us why.
I went to the dollar store and I bought these old lady curler foams, and I slid it open and I jammed it over top of my iPhone microphone, and it's like the best one.
Yeah, it's really good, dude. It's really clear.
That is so brilliant. You're like,
hey,
our tech staff was just like blown away by that.
We're going on Shark Tank next week to promote it.
Okay, so I think that ends the
tech portion.
Yeah, I gotta tighten the gizmo here.
All right, tighten your gizmos.
Well, Jess, we're here at the Plein Air Easton Podcast, and once again,
sure
welcome back to the desk.
It's not even a desk. We just had a great conversation with Chris Kolupski.
Yeah, I mean, if you're listening, his voice is very easy to listen to, as our technician Dina was talking about.
The takeaway that I have in terms of him being an educator that I'm going to be sort of meditating on, it's not like a spoiler alert, but he talked about how important practice is, but more importantly, how important it is to have good teachers and to watch other people paint. And I think that is such a smart thing, because he said, you can practice and practice and practice your mistakes, but we all have to keep pushing ourselves to learn and grow, and the way that we do that is by having really great teachers. We really like Chris. He seems like a great guy, and maybe we're gonna have him back after he's done with Paint Out West, because like he said, I'm sure some hijinks will ensue along the way.
Yeah, he's out there with the rattlesnakes and mountain lions.
He said there weren't rattlesnakes and mountain lions.
Welcome everyone to the Plein Air Easton Podcast. I am Tim Wigan here with...
Hi, I'm Jessica Bellis. Good to see everybody. That doesn't even make sense.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
What are you watching these days?
What am I watching? I'm watching that great new Steve Martin show on Hulu. That's like with Steve Martin and Martin Short. Oh my God, I love them. That's what I'm actually watching. That and Bachelor in Paradise. I will totally
Two extremes.
Call myself out. Yeah, no, I'm a real mess. No, mostly it's all Avalon all the time and trying to keep my kids healthy and in school.
How's Plein Air coming for next year?
Plein Air,
we talk about all Avalon all the time.
Plein Air feels like a beautiful, shining, distant star that we will get on a spaceship and travel to before we know it.
Right, gotcha. And so we're taking a little. We're not interviewing a plein air artist this week. We're not.
Yes,
talking
we are interviewing a plein air artist. This is so exciting.
We're not interviewing a Plein Air Easton artist this week.
No, we're interviewing somebody who has never been to Plein Air Easton. This is only our second conversation with him, but we were so intrigued by the first conversation that we had him that we decided to invite him on our podcast. Today we are talking to artist, educator, man about town, Chris Kolupski. Adventurer.
Chris Kolupski.
Chris, how are you? Hi.
Hi, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
We're so excited to be talking to you. And I guess I want to start by saying...
just get right to it.
Yeah, we interview everybody on Skype, and we're looking at Chris, and he by far wins, hands down, the most spectacular, beautiful background view that I have not just ever seen while recording this podcast, but ever seen ever. Chris, where are you?
At the top of the Colorado National Monument. I'm at the, I believe it's the Monument Canyon View, and the road is not that far away, and I'm just kind of walking along a cliff here that I set up, and I taught a couple of classes off this cliff today.
And you said the Colorado National Monument Park?
Yes.
It is just fantastic. So you can see all of the sort of cliffs, and it has that like Rocky Mountain like golden hue to it. There's it's just absolutely fantastic.
It's definitely a digital Emmy for best backdrop on a Facebook or Skype conversation for sure. It's really gorgeous.
Chris, like, tell me why you're out there. You don't live in Colorado. Explain to everybody like how you are at work today in such a beautiful place.
Well, I've been coming out here for, I don't know, 15 years or so. I mean, and when I first came out here, it was to visit family, and I didn't really plan to paint. I didn't think of myself as a painter of the West or anything like that. I was a portrait artist, and so I had a studio back in Rochester, New York, and it was all focused on figurative and portraiture. Well, I came out here and foolishly didn't even bring my paints. That's how like backwards I was. I was literally teaching plein air paint, and yet I come all the way out here. I brought nothing. Well, I saw this place, they wanted to bring me up on the monument. And I mean, I lost my mind. I drove over to, I think it was Michael's, and I bought all the junk, not good quality setup, just enough to get going because I had such an impulse to paint. And just over this mound, as a matter of fact, I did a painting, and that's 15 or 16 years ago. They still have it at my sister's house.
Aww.
Not a great painting, but it kind of reignited my desire to be painting outdoors as much as possible. And it also ignited my desire to paint these types of scenes, not what I see in Rochester, which is green, and water and marinas and all that kind of stuff. I mean, we have nothing like this in Rochester. I mean, we have Letchworth Park, which is it's a canyon, but it's green,
Right.
So
no, we've talked to a lot of people who do participate in competitions like ours on a regular basis, and I think that we hear over and over again how inspiring it is to change the landscape that you're used to painting. To like, it's a way to refresh your brain, your skills, your brush, your artwork, and I can see that. I can see and feel that passion kind of coming off of you.
Yeah. It's amazing. And I mean, it's quiet. This is not as well trafficked as, for example, over the plateau here is Arches and Canyonland. Mm-hmm. Down there is Bryce Canyon and Monument Valley. And those see more traffic, especially Arches. The monument here, there's just not a lot of people here. I mean, they stop, they look out, they stay on the road. A few trickle down and hike to these lookout points, but nobody's been here this morning, and I've been here for
just amazing.
What about rattlesnakes or mountain lions?
Not here. I mean, it's there's bighorn sheep. I mean, there's bighorns that crawl around up on that hill behind me. I mean, you'll see them sometimes, and they're in here. There's placards, but thankfully I haven't run into one yet.
Well, there's no people, but I guess you could run into bears in Rochester.
Yes, we can.
Chris, I want to back it up because I'm always like obsessed with people's sort of origin story and where they came from and how they got to be. Maybe it's my son's love of comic books, but I'm always like, how did you get to be who you are and where you are? So did you have a paintbrush in hand from when you were a tiny toddler? Like, was art something that you always connected or felt yourself aligned with, or is it something that came about later? Tell me about sort of your early childhood moments.
Sure. No, I drew my whole life. I started drawing. I see it now with my son Harrison, who's 8. Same as him, monsters, dinosaurs. For him it's Jurassic Park, and for me it was Ray Harryhausen movies, Valley of the Gwangi, and those old Sinbad movies, and Land of the Lost on TV, and then Star Wars happened, and nothing's been the same since. So for me, it was my creature design, dabbled in special effects. Me and my buddy did stop motion animation movies, and, we got into creature effects and all that stuff. But around high school, I started getting serious. I think it boiled down to some trips up to Canada. And we were my family was going to this lake, Stokoe Lake, and we were camping there year after year, and I brought my watercolors, and I wasn't drawing monsters. I was just painting, the what do they call it? The Canadian shield rock, as it sticks through, and it's beautifully eroded, these pink granite forms, and I'd go out on the boat and fish and paint. And I had an art teacher at that time, David DeClerc, in Rochester, New York. I have lost touch with him. I'm not sure he's still with us, but he was a traditional painter and introduced me to Wyeth's and Winslow Homer, particularly watercolorists. And he was very, very supportive, and he got me going. And I don't know, I stopped drawing creatures and started drawing landscapes. And I mean, I did. I worked for Watchtower Bible and Tract Society as an illustrator for several years, and that employed my figurative portraiture skills in their, biblical historical illustrations. And when I stopped working for Watchtower, I came back to Rochester and started doing portraits. The funny thing about that is that Rochester is also the birthplace of Nelson Shanks, who is one of the best, known portrait painters. But he got out of there, and he told me that too. He said, he goes, if you want to take yourself seriously as a portrait artist, you've got to get out of Rochester. I stayed there and did the best I could. I studied with Nelson Shanks and some other, portrait painters. I started an atelier in Rochester, taught a bunch of people, the slow 2-year method, and it was all figurative based and portrait based. And we had a plein air unit. And the reason was color sense, because when you come out here and you're confronted by that, it's completely different colors than you're going to mix when you're painting skin tones. Skin tones they're very narrow, and they're very grayed, and they're very confined to yellows and oranges, earth tones almost. You come out here and you see that, and your eyes, you have to use a wider palette. And so I thought in those days, plein air was just a tool for color sensitivity.
So interesting.
It wasn't until my trip out here where, plein air became a whole big, completely different thing.
That's just so interesting. So most people who know at least your early work are connected to portraits that you've done.
Yes.
And those portraits were and illustrating work. But now, how much of your overall work is focused on plein air? Are you still doing portraits, or is it give me sort of a percentage based of what you do, not necessarily what you love, but what you do?
The portrait business is shrinking because I'm not promoting it.
Right.
Yet I just did one last month. I mean, it's kind of the sort of thing where if you've done it for a lot of years, probably
people will find you, right?
Your portraits are out there, and so jobs come, and illustration jobs occasionally come now and then too. And I say yes to the ones that pay well. But your question was, how much is plein air painting taking over? In my mind, it already took over.
Yeah, it's where your passion is right now.
Yeah, and you know what was a big pivotal point for me? It kind of sounds silly. When I changed the cover painting on my website.
Oh, I bet.
From a portrait to a landscape.
Right.
That was a big deal.
I bet it was. And the atelier that you crafted in that portrait space. Is that now almost primarily focused on plein air painting? I mean, you do a whole lot of teaching, right? Can you characterize what an average year is in terms of how many classes you've got out there?
Okay, I teach 3 a week, and 2 are exclusively landscape. I'll show you one. It's absurd, I know, to have an easel and I'm painting a bird, but I had to actually fulfill my regular class schedule. I don't know. This morning I taught this class, and this was a sunrise class. Now this is the landscape class. I don't know if you can see it.
So now he's showing us a picture of the sort of a sunrise on the view that we're seeing.
Looks kind of like you're looking down, and if it were nighttime, or if you want to get sort of pop culture about it, it'd be like where the sort of down on this cliff where the monkeys would have flown in The Wizard of Oz. It's kind of like what it.
That scene is kind of below you.
In the morning. In the morning.
And then the rest of this month will be all landscape. And I think you know about Paint Out West, which is the big outdoor workshop at 5 different national parks.
How is that going, Chris?
It's good. I'm almost filled up.
That's so exciting. And you've got students from all over the place.
Yeah, that's true. I got them from all over the world, actually. Rome, nobody from China, nobody from Russia.
Are you listening out there, listeners?
Yeah,
it's time for you to
stop being political.
fill in his gaps. Make him worldwide. We need artists from China and from Russia to contact him about his Paint Out West. Before we get too far into that, Chris, I want to sort of talk about. We had this conversation when we talked briefly, but COVID certainly upset everybody's apple cart, and it sounds like teaching is a passion of yours, and is you have a lot of students who are following you, and then COVID strikes in Rochester. What did you do?
Well, for me, I had already been teaching virtually before COVID struck, in a small way. It was sloppy and not really well done. But the thing was, when COVID struck, I had the bones already to kind of upscale it a little bit. Not that my operation is huge or to big scale at all. It's not. It's just me and some equipment. But when COVID hit, all of a sudden, I could take on more students, and there were more students to be taken on. And the other thing too was, because I do this, I kind of paint outdoors, and then I bring the students with me via this live virtual equipment. There were housebound students that got to travel and paint vicariously through me, and polish up their skills. And so I'm not trying to say COVID was good, but I definitely benefited from COVID because it let me go all in on virtual teaching.
It's really interesting.
There's certainly forced innovation that I think happened for a lot of people and in a lot of industries.
I think in the art world, because that happened also in the theater teaching, in acting classes. I mean, we have people from Easton that are taking acting classes from well-known studios in California and New York City that could have never happened before. Right. And that sounds like it happened here as well. Jess, we're going to take a quick break and then get back into Paint Out West with Chris.
Yeah, it'll be a perfect segue. We'll do our best not to make it feel like a infomercial, but you're going to learn a little bit about Paint Out West in our break.
Yeah, and if you decide not to do Paint Out West, you should definitely pop in on his feed, because it is absolutely gorgeous where he is. And I imagine for plenty of people in the throes of COVID when it first started, it was really very sort of awesome to look at whatever's behind him, because it is gorgeous out there. Awesome. We'll be back in just 1 second with more from plein air painter Chris Kolupski.
On Friday, October 1st, 2021, when the sun rises upon the Colorado National Monument, have your paint set up and ready to go for the first session of Paint Out West, a virtual painting workshop conducted by Chris Kolupski. Stream this multi-class event from the comfort of your own studio as Chris demonstrates plein air painting from the Colorado National Monument, Arches National Park, Canyonlands, Zion, and Monument Valley. Chris will explain each step of his process and include magnified views of his color mixing and brush application. You can paint along with him in real time or replay classes later and pause to practice. Afterward, send a photo of your work and receive critique. This is a one-of-a-kind opportunity for you to paint the great American West without the cost of travel and lodging. Spots are limited, so don't miss out. Visit chriskolupski.com to register. That's CHRISKOLUPSKI.com to register.
Welcome back to the Plein Air Easton Podcast. Tim Wagon here with Jess Bellis. Thank you for joining us. We are listening through Skype. If anyone wonders about the feed, we're watching Chris Kolupski out in Colorado, and
I know I have to say he's wandering around by the cliffs in Colorado, and I'm getting a little bit nervous that if you took 2 steps back, we would watch you fall to your death. Like I haven't gotten totally seasick watching him wander in this beautiful backdrop, but it does look like he is totally an intrepid painter with how close he is to the edge. Be very careful, Chris.
Very clear, because people back home, they feel the same way. I am far away from the edge. I don't get close to the edge. I do get a little, I get a little vertigo if I get too close.
No, he looks incredibly high up. I'm getting vertigo watching him, but I'm sure it is in part the perspective of where his camera
How
is
high are you
easily.
up, Chris? I mean, do you have?
What's the elevation? Do we know?
Yeah, it's not 1,000 feet to the floor. I'm going to guess it's maybe in the 600, 700 feet up.
60 stories up.
Maybe it's 800. I don't know.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, well, it's gorgeous.
It looks big. I want to hear more about Paint Out West and how like this particular teaching concept kind of came about, and what your students are going to be experiencing and what they can expect when they sign up. Because why we decided to bring him on is Chris did offer to sponsor some of our episodes, and we're grateful for that. But then when we started talking to him, like I thought this was such a cool concept that I was like, I want to understand more about what this is and like how it works, because I think it's a cool idea.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it boils down to technology, and it boils down to the ease with which miniaturization of like the iPhone, GoPro cameras, all the stuff. I'm running this with very small and very lightweight equipment, so I could see, a year ago that it was pretty easy to go on location and paint, and it was pretty easy to set up basically so that they could look at close-up views of color mixing. And I was watching people deal with opaque color mixing and basically learn it. And not to get too technical with you, but opaque color mixing is one of the harder parts of oil painting. And so because the camera could get in places where nobody else has ever been, when you're doing a demo for 15 people, they can't look over your shoulder. So I could start to see there's real advantages of this camera-based teaching. And then you take that outdoors, and the student is the best of both worlds. They can look right up at your color mixing, and you can talk about percentages of pigment. And then you can pivot the camera over there, and they can see, 150 miles off into the distance. So then I started to think, okay, I'm going to go out west. I'll just bring my classes with me. I'll just teach them out west. In fact, I had already done vacations where I just took my classes with me. Then I started thinking, no, go bigger. Plan the trip around the teaching. Build the classes around destinations and make the whole thing about the teaching and the workshops. I had to iron out some technical stuff just to make sure that it would work. Now, one of the things that, unfortunately, it's an insurmountable obstacle right now. We can do this via Skype because I'm in cell range right now. The right down there. So there's cell towers, right? I've got 3 bars, so I can completely conduct Zoom classes in Skype from right here. But the minute that I start to go into Arches or Canyonlands or Monument Valley or where else am I going? Zion. After a mile or two away from the visitor center, you're completely out of cell range. And so
right.
I had to have a plan B. So how can I do essentially the same class, but completely record it and then send the link to the recording? Turns out that's not that difficult either. And so that's the gig. It's going to be 5 national parks, 5 step-by-step painting demos. That's the other part of this. And this isn't so much plein air. This is just what happens when you teach a 2-hour painting 3 times a week. I don't want to talk about procedure too much because it's also like a prison. Procedure can be very confining. But when you're dealing with newer students and you can show them predictable set procedures where if you do this, then this will happen. And if you do that, then that will happen. And you can put it in a step-by-step format for them, they learn.
No, I think that's really interesting and important. And I think that artists who are trying to learn, especially at the beginning, it's really important to look for educators like you. I think I've certainly watched a lot of plein air demos over time. And I think that a lot of like our plein air competition artists, for example, if you take a workshop with them, it's a whole lot more advanced than that right out of the gate. Or they're showing you some more tips and tricks versus step-by-step. Like, this is exactly how, again, I'm so interested when you're like, if you do this, this will be your outcome. I mean, I'm notoriously not an artist, and I'll never forget that, Camille Preswadek is like, I can teach anybody to paint. Like, I can teach you to be a good painter. Like, you just have to practice. Like, you have to work at it. Like, it is something that, like, every single person can learn. And I like that reminder, because I think that there are so many people who think you either like have the talent or you don't. And I think that that's really positive messaging that you just put forth. Like, if you go A plus B, it's going to equal C every time, as long as you follow the A plus B part.
Yeah. Well, you got it. And there's higher levels of it that are not so easily, they can't be, distilled down to A plus.
Of course.
But we're talking about more beginner painters. And one of the huge eye openers for me was one of those corporations contacted me, and they said, "Hey, we looked into the whole wine and paint thing, and we don't want to do that because they had a reason why." And they said, "But you're doing these virtual things, and we want to do a COVID wine and da-da-da, but we want you to teach it because you paint better." Okay. That was the first time I ever dealt with absolute novices, and I had to basically give them their paints. Anyway, boiled down to, it was a great experience because it really demonstrated that people who have very little ability or zero ability can actually get a pretty good result when the process is slowed down and you show them up close what you're doing.
I love that, and I love that there's, I think that there can be so much ego in it. I love your sort of energy about that, in terms of like, hey, you can do this too. Like, let's just break it down, and I think that that's just really cool.
How much? I'll tell you why in a second, Chris. How much is your class to take?
You're talking about the Paint Out West?
Yeah, the Paint Out West. How much is that?
$179 for all 5 classes.
$179 for all 5 classes.
Yep, and they are
really good.
You're going to be able to replay, certainly replay for a year. I have to see what it looks like beyond the year, but I know I can guarantee replay, unlimited replay for a year. And I also critique the work. Not during it. I'm going to ask the students to just take their 5 paintings and put them in one email and send that to me, so that when it's all over with, early November, I'll be able to sit down and work with each student and critique their work.
It's just so cool.
Well, I'll tell you why I asked. Once every year, I paint a painting with other people that are here at the Avalon, typically during Plein Air.
Yeah.
And we do it during the quick draw. And I let anybody who paints paint on it, And I will be very honest to anybody out there who's listening who hasn't sold a painting before. I always sell it for $50. I think the most we've ever sold it for was $75. And they're always, the community gets involved, and they turn out to be like charming little pieces or whatever. Sometimes they're a mess. But with the thrill of selling that painting the first time was really, really something that was really exciting for me. It was also very sad because you're never going to see the painting again, which was really kind of a weird thing too. But every time I do this, I always want to do it again. And then I never do. I wait until Plein Air comes around every year, and I do one again. And one of the biggest things, the scariest things for me, is trying to find the right colors to put down on the canvas, because you have to mix colors, like you're saying. And what would I need to bring to it to be ready to do that? If you're talking about a beginning painter,
you've asked a pretty big question there, and 50 artists will have 50 different answers, but I'll answer it. The way I do, I use a double split primary palette. That means there's a warm and cool yellow, warm and cool red, warm and cool blue. I have white, and I have a few convenience colors, which are my browns, a red or brown and a yellow or brown. That's it. That gives me a wide color mixing gamut. Some artists would say too wide, and I appreciate that point of view. There are other artists that do not use a double primary. They confine their gamut to a more limited palette range, and that's just going to ensure that their color mixing is a little bit grayer. And in landscape painting, that can be a good thing, because our tendency is to exaggerate. So I have a big, wide palette, a big, wide gamut, and I just have to confine myself to the actual mixing range. So what I do is I pre-mix my colors, at least the big colors, and I try to get the colors and the values in their right relationship before I slap them on the canvas. So I know, for example, that big scene out there, if I get the sky is
the horizon. What color is the horizon right there?
Well, asking specifically, you could mix it high chroma with a white plus a lemon yellow and one of your blues, or you could go lower chroma, which would be to take your ultramarine blue and your yellow ochre and your white, and that's going to guarantee you that lemony green at the horizon is a little bit duller. And generally, you know me, I exaggerate chroma, which is saturation. So for me, I'm always trying to nudge myself to gray my colors down more, and I'm getting there. This is the grayest I've painted in a long time, so that's a good thing. But as far as kit, really brushes are either hard or soft. There's a gazillion of them, but they're either going to be stiff and spread the paint out like a spatula that squishes it down, or if you're painting wet on wet, you're going to want a softer brush so that you can put wet paint on wet paint, and the brush won't become
without smearing it.
That's right. So that's it. A little solvent, a little medium to control your viscosity, and the rest is.
I think it's too advanced for me still.
No, I don't think it is, Tim. Here's what I learned. Like, I totally know the things I'm getting Tim for Christmas this year, and he's incredibly hard to shop for. I've had some real home runs over time, and I've had some real doozers. So I'm like, I'm thinking about a new theme as the holidays get closer. Chris, like when your students are painting along, are you sending them a photograph or anything to reference, or are you just going back and forth?
No, they have to have a photo reference at the start of each class. When I'm teaching at home, they get the photo reference the day before, because
so they can start looking at it and breaking it down and thinking about it.
Yeah, I just do it. It makes it a little bit easier for them. For Paint Out West, they're getting the photograph the morning of, and they're getting it.
So they're
in the light of the actual scene that I'm going to start the painting.
Perfect. So they're going to have, so not only are they going to have your sort of step-by-step instructions, they're going to have a reference photo that they can kind of use to try to replicate your step-by-step approach. And then at the end, they can take a picture and email it to you, and you're going to spend some careful time sort of consulting with them and giving them some constructive feedback via email to give them constructive criticisms, right?
Yep, but that's going to be at the end of the whole month, because otherwise the inundation
be overwhelmed.
Interrupt the flow of the actual workshop.
That's so exciting. I feel like I already know the answer to what is typically one of our last questions, but I've been asking it of everybody lately, perhaps because I'm feeling like I'm in a little bit of a creative rut, or a place where I feel like so many things are so dark and hard out there. It's hard to generate new positive ideas. And so if you find yourself, Chris, in a space where you're feeling like uninspired, or you don't really know what to paint, or the paintings aren't coming out the way you want, what kind of advice do you have to give for people, or what do you usually do if you find yourself in that space?
I don't have the luxury of finding myself in that space, because I've got to teach 2 to 3 times a week anyway. So what the answer to your question is what I've learned, which is do it anyway. Okay. In other words, if I feel lousy or uninspired, or if I feel like $1,000,000, it doesn't matter. If there's a class that day, a painting is going to be done, and it's going to be done the right way. Sometimes they're not as good. Sometimes they surprise me. But the point is, in the doing of the thing is the rescue from your funk. So usually I feel a lot better at the end of a painting class than I do if I go in and I'm not feeling, up to snuff.
And Chris, real quick before we go, what about practice? I'm reading a lot of things about practicing now, like before I go play something or whatever. What about as far as painting goes? What about practice?
All right, I have an opinion on that too. Of course, practice and painting from life is irreplaceable. But the thing that doesn't get as much airtime is the importance of, instead of just practicing, one artist says practicing your mistakes, instead of ingraining procedures or techniques that might not be working for you, I think it's important to spend a lot of time looking at other artists' work. And it's important to discriminate between the artists who you choose to, who you groove to, and the ones who you choose not to. And that doesn't mean, you're insulting this group of artists, but part of our growth is not studying from nature. It's studying art and saying, man, I like harder edges than I thought I did, because when everything's mushy around the edges like my tendency is, I find that the painting is mushy and it's not as punchy. But this artist who uses really hard edges and strong graphical light and dark shapes, I like that. That's not in my work right now. I'm going to put that in my work right now. See, you can't learn that by painting out there. Or if you do, it'll take a lot longer. But if you study artists and maybe study with artists, you're going to learn it faster.
Chris, awesome. That is such a, like, you couldn't have dropped a bigger, like, better conclusion to this interview than that. I think that is such great advice and so applicable to across more things than just art. And I think that you really do come across as a tremendously talented painter, but also educator. So thanks for supporting the Plein Air Easton podcast and for taking the time to talk to us today and for transporting us on a trip out of the basement of the Avalon Theater to just a beautiful national wilderness that I've never seen before. So thank you for that, Chris. Yeah. This has just been great.
Like Jess says, it's always good to get out of, regardless of how beautiful your hometown is, get out and to see the rest of what's going on in the world. And
even if you can't.
Right.
Chris will take you there.
Yeah, Chris, I may sign up for that class too.
I know. I think again.
That would be a pleasure, and thanks so much for having me. It's been a
Chris,
blessing.
are we ever going to see you at Plein Air Easton? Do you do any of the competition circuit, or if you don't, why are you scared?
I just frankly haven't gotten to Easton, Maryland, and we've been through Maryland a lot. But yeah, I'll do it. I'll sign up.
Apply. It would be great to meet you. And not that I can guarantee you get in. Our jurying process is a wicked one, but
we've got some really good rock walls around here too. You could paint if you needed.
I was gonna say our landscape does not look like that, Chris. I've got to say that. But we'd love to meet you in person, and thank you so much for your time and your support. We really appreciate it.
Okay, my pleasure. Thank you.
Hey everybody, this is producer of the show, Nick Richards. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I wanted to wrap the show up today with a little sneak peek of our interview that'll be dropping 2 weeks from today, and that is an interview with Plein Air Easton alumnus Lori Marr.
Honestly, if you look at my portraits, I mean, it's obvious I'm no portrait painter. That is obviously not my primary skill. But in painting portraits, I really believe that my landscapes got better when I took these portrait painting classes. And I'll tell you why. Because if you're drawing a tree and you draw the branches and it's a little bit off, no one's going to look at that and say, oh man, that tree looks weird. That doesn't look right. But if you draw someone's nose or you put their eye in just a little bit, I mean, it can be off by a millimeter, and it's like, what's wrong with that person?
Right. I get that.
Just the slightest difference in the line of someone's mouth makes it look like either they're smiling or they're scowling. It's amazing how the most subtle difference can make a huge difference in a portrait. So I think that it forces you to be spot on as far as your, shapes and lines in order to describe something. So then when you go out to do a tree, your eye is more trained to look for subtle differences, because, it's easy to look at a tree and say, oh yeah, I know what a tree looks like. Or, I know how that branch grows. But it's another thing to actually stop and study it and go, wait a minute, it doesn't actually do that. It actually does this, or it doesn't actually bend in that direction. It bends in this other direction. So I think it just sharpens your eye and makes you more aware of subtle differences.
The Plein Air Easton Podcast is brought to you by the Avalon Foundation, enriching the lives of those on the Eastern Shore of Maryland through the arts. Visit avalonfoundation.org for details on events, performances, and educational programming offered throughout the year. The Plein Air Easton Podcast is produced by Nick Richards. Our theme music was generously provided by Blue Dot Sessions. Remember to rate, comment, and subscribe. You can learn more about Plein Air Easton at pleinaireaston.com.